Hello everybody, it's Wyron here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, Quick Magic gameplay. This time around we will be playing as the Masters of Artillery, known as the Brettonians. So, this time around, of course, on Everail Ridge, on one side, myself with the Brettonian army, and on the other, my opponent with his whole blob of dwarves. So, knowing that the dwarves have a lot of options against Brettonian cav, they can always just kind of corner camp and bring a lot of heavy artillery, say orking guns or cannons, and they can really put a dent in your cavalry. I decided to go very artillery heavy and beat the dwarves at their own game. So for my lord here, I decided to bring the Fey Enchantress. She just, mostly because she's cheap and she does have Lore of Life. She's fairly tanky as well, for all things considered, with some missile resistance, physical resistance there, plus huge mobility. And of course she does have Mist of the Lady, which does cause damage over time, and of course -5 melee attack. And this is a decent choice against the dwarves, because dwarves don't really have the units that can kind of just encircle her and beat her down effectively. For spells, I did bring Earthblood, Flesh to Stone, and Regrowth. I of course brought Arcane Conduit, Favor of the Fae, as well as Chalice of Potions. Alongside that, my front line is composed entirely of Foot Squires. You can see completely unupgraded, stock variant. Foot Squires aren't particularly great against dwarves. Despite their armor piercing and anti-infantry bonus, they will still struggle pretty badly against everything better than, say, Longbeards. Even Longbeards can give them a run for their money because their armor's only 70. It's not that great. They don't have shields, and they definitely struggle. I do have them stiffened up a little bit with some men-at-arms. The men-at-arms are good as a sort of slayer trap. They can kind of tie down slayers, they can flank and get some rear charges in there, and hopefully just muck down the dwarves a little bit. They do have passable, if not inspiring, stats as well. And of course silver shields to soak up missiles. In the woods, we do have a single unit of Questing Knights, and these guys are, of course, very strong against dwarves. They do have that 40 melee attack, 36 melee defense, monstrous weapon strength of 48, with most of that being armor piercing, decent charge bonus, which they can boost through lance formation, and, of course, passable armor, decent HP, all that sort of stuff. The biggest problem is that if dwarves decide to bring artillery, they can often gun your heavy cav down before it gets into range. They can be incredibly cost-effective. They can bring a lot of slayers, and Brettonians don't really have the shooting to shut that down. So that's why I'm focusing on artillery, and you can see I have 4 units of field trebuchets with 3 gold chevrons, so 9 veterancy, and we are going to see how well these guys can chip down the dwarf front line. Obviously, trebuchets and Brettonian artillery is not known for its accuracy at all. It's considered pretty atrocious, and it really is, but they do have pretty solid weapon strength. They do, as you can see, decent armor piercing values, great range, and obviously if my opponent had brought artillery, I would have simply relied on mass to oversaturate and crush them in counter battery fire. For my opponent, he did decide to bring a pretty decent anti-Brettonia build. You can see Ungrim Iron Fist over here, though no artillery. Ungrim Iron Fist with Death Blow, no Axe of Drago, of course Deadly Onslaught, as well as Foe Seeker. On the flanks, he does have a unit of Slayers on one end, Dragonback Slayers on the other to shut down any heavy cav. Of course, these guys are very solid in that situation. His main line is a mix of Longbeards, Dwarf Warriors with great weapons, Longbeards with great weapons, actually basically a mix of just about everything, and a single unit of hammers. And of course these guys can definitely lay the smackdown on the poor Brettonians, who of course don't have the best of infantry. Like I said, despite the fact that Foot Squires do have supposedly good damage output against infantry, they definitely don't trade even that well with Longbeards, who do have monstrous melee defense and decent enough stats elsewhere to trade well. Beyond that, my opponent does have a single unit of Gremlins Ironbreakers. Of course, these guys can lay a smackdown on just about anything Brettonia puts on the field, though of course they're not great against cavalry. They do still have 82 melee defense, 90 models, lots of HP and blasting charges and all that goodness. Beyond that, my opponent does have 2 units of Quarrelers, as well as Iron Drakes with Trollhammer torpedoes, so definitely decent contingent against artillery. You can see my rocks are already flying in, trying to pepper down these Gremlins Ironbreakers, knocking down a few models. You can see definitely the accuracy isn't very good, but I don't really care. I'm simply playing to oversaturate and collapse them as best I can, and then holding up with the infantry. So you can see Quarrelers moving up, a Runesmith over here with all of his runes, Rune of Oath and Steel, which isn't bad against Brettonia, which often has non-AP oriented options. Rune of Wrath and Rune of Negation, so definitely a decent selection there. You can see the hammers that are going to become the focus of my hate, and you can see they are taking a pounding. These poor Dwarf Warriors that are getting in the way are also taking some collateral damage. You can see the hammers are already down by 15 models and several thousand HP. And of course the Dwarf Warriors are taking some collateral damage there. You can see more rocks flying in, picking off model after model. And trebuchets don't have atrocious accuracy when they're this high veterancy. And you can see that just these guys are being taken to Pound Town. You can see hammers down to 42 models, Longbeards down to 66. And I'm simply hiding these Questing Knights, waiting for my opponent to bypass me so I can get into that juicy backline. I'm also using my Men-at-Arms to tie it on the Slayers, because while Slayers will easily kind of crush the Men-at-Arms can still put a bit of a beating on them. Anytime the rocks are coming in hot and heavy, trying to put these hammers down, though you can see at this point it's a little bit of a waste. So over here you can see Slayers are going to get tied down by Men-at-Arms. Obviously they're going to crush the Men-at-Arms, but they will buy me a little bit of time. And now the Foot Squires are pushing in. I definitely should have pivoted and shifted my front line a little sooner, so definitely a bit of a mistake on my part, but it is what it is. Over here you can see the Hammers have been taken to Pound Town. The Foot Squires are going to tie down these long range with great weapons, and now you can see the Crossfire is going to come in hot and heavy from those Trebuchets as the Questing Knights pull out and go for the rear charge on the Quarrelers. Over here, the Men-at-Arms, of course, do collapse under the weight of fire from the Norgrim's Ironbreakers, which, of course, will do some friendly fire, but are just going to crush these Men-at-Arms and Foot Squires and cause a collapse there. In the meantime, though, the Trebuchets are firing over open sights, and there's a blob of Dwarven infantry. Definitely a bit of a mistake on my opponent's part, though he doesn't have too many options. But he has blobbed a lot here, and he's just taken to Pound Town. I do try to get a Chalice of Potions on this blob over here, but it really doesn't work out. And I completely whiff, unfortunately. But the rocks still coming in hot and heavy. Some friendly fire, but I don't really care. It's whatever. It's just Foot Squires. They're only peasants after all. In the back line, my Questing Knights who have courageously dove in, but they are getting wrecked by the Iron Drakes with Trollhammer torpedoes, who just do so much damage to these guys. You can see they are on 33 models, but they're going to take a volley here from those Spud guns, and several of them are falling. You can see about another 10 or so models do go down to that concentrated fire from the Iron Drakes, even though I'm trying to shut them down now. These Men-at-Arms are also going to be able to flank. Once I shut down the Trollhammers with the Men-at-Arms, I'll then be able to shift the Questing Knights into an engagement with the Quarrelers, though of course Ungrim is still doing work. In the meantime, Trebuchet's fire coming in hot and heavy and completely crushing this front line. The Dragonback Slayers have been taking the Pound Town, really only the Norgrimling's Ironbreakers holding out, and of course the Runesmith buying some time here. But Foot Squires do trade relatively well. I have cast this corner unit; it's just kind of encircled and under heavy pressure. I have casted Regrowth as well as stone, as well as the Flesh to Stone on them, and now I'm getting a nasty little recharge here with these Foot Squires. And Foot Squires do have a passable charge bonus of 22, which I do believe, and I could be wrong here, but I do believe that it's actually better than even Great Swords and better than White Lions. So definitely pretty solid there. In the meantime, the Trebuchets are kind of pivoting here. You can see just these artillery batteries pounding those Quarrelers into the dust because my opponent did blob them up a little bit. They're going to be taking to Pound Town, and you can see down by about half their model count overall, and they are about to be plowed into by the last remaining Questing Knights. In the meantime, Men-at-Arms with shields tying down the Trollhammers, and slowly but surely chipping away at them. Trollhammers don't have the best melee stats, though obviously they are very tanky thanks to their armor. And the backline here, Hammers are completely routing. You can see the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons falling apart. The Foot Squires here pursuing, and artillery fire still coming in hot and heavy, crumping these Grimling's Ironbreakers, and really causing my opponent's army to collapse. You can see finally they are going to break completely. The Runesmith has shattered, and of course that only leaves Ungrim, who is unbreakable, as well as a little pocket of Slayers here, who are about to get beaten down by the block of Angry Foot Squires. There's only one guy left. I'm not entirely sure where the other guy is, though he does get decapitated, and my opponent does decide to GG out with the Masonry flying in. So definitely a little bit of a cheesy build there, definitely a little bit silly. But I think it's actually kind of potentially effective against Dwarves. Normally, if you fight against Dwarves in Brettonia, they'll obviously bring organ guns. They'll bring a bunch of Slayers. Not always, as you saw here, but oftentimes that is the case. You'll see, say, 2 organ guns and some cannons maybe, and some Slayers. And they can really take you to Pound Town. They can really hurt you pretty badly, and your cavalry will struggle to get into good position. But knowing this was a map with a bit of a lip in the middle, so I could get the arc out of the Field Trebuchets, and the fact that Field Trebuchets with this much veterancy can shoot fairly accurately, I figured I could just crush my opponent's heaviest infantry units and let the Foot Squires do the rest of the work. As you can see, none of the Foot Squires really shown. Obviously, the Men-at-Arms are terrible. This unit actually gained, I think, some chevrons because they were fighting the Iron Drakes, so obviously not a huge kill count there, but doing some damage. And even the Questing Knights didn't do too good, especially because I left them in there against the Iron Drakes. But the artillery just did work. It was able to chew through those units, crush those Hammers really quickly, and then take those Norgrimling's Ironbreakers and the Dragonback Slayers and those sorts of units to Pound Town, just absolutely crush them. So definitely very potent that field artillery. 4 units of them. The Dwarves obviously not expecting artillery, and so they can be very, very effective. And I think it's definitely a little bit of definitely a little bit gimmicky. It can be very potent strategy against the Dwarves. From my opponent's perspective, I'm not a big fan of Quarrelers against Brettonia. I think that it's best to bring some Thunderers simply for the armor-piercing values. You obviously want something to zone away big flyers like, say, Lewin or heavy cavalry and that sort of stuff. Also, not the biggest fan of just of the heaviest infantry. I think Hammers are complete overkill against Brettonians. Obviously, they can crack units like cavalry much more effectively than, say, great weapon Longbeards, but at the same time, You don't really need this power against infantry, and generally Brettonian armies oriented at dwarves will not be that cavalry heavy. You'll obviously see a few questing knights here and there, and maybe some knights errant, occasionally even some of the grail units. But in general, I think you're best off bringing some of the cheaper troops because they can still trade very effectively with foot squires. You don't even need that much AP. Honestly, Longbeards, obviously it wasn't visible here, but they got taken to Pound Town by artillery. But even Longbeards can stall and trade pretty well against, say, foot squires, especially if you have that fire support from handguns or thunderers. Regardless, great game to my opponent here. On Grim, it was very quick, very furious. You can see most of my infantry corps did get beaten pretty badly, obviously in large part to friendly fire, but also simply because they weren't really quite a match for all those slayers, for the powerhouse fire from the Norgorth, the explosives from the Gremlings, and all that sort of stuff. Even the hammers, who got crushed by artillery, came out with 17 kills in that, so definitely not bad. Whereas, of course, men-at-arms did nothing, and most of the work was done by Trebs. So definitely great game to my opponent. I had a lot of fun and just trying this sort of silly build and beating the dwarves at their own game. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions like that, be sure to leave them down in the comments below, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye for now.